Great food and a beautiful coastline. What's not to like? But behind the picturesque views, there are two things central to this region: pasta and mafia. I know it sounds cliched, but these contrasting elements are a part of life in Bari. So we decided to look at both. First, we delve into Italy's pasta crisis, how a staple food caused national upheaval due to soaring prices, and what has the government done to reverse it. After that, we shift focus to the darker side of Puglia, the mafia's influence in the region. Will their shadowy presence affect the G7 summit? Plus, what do the preparations look like? How much does it cost to host a summit like this? And while the guest list may be diverse, the G7 leaders have a lot to deal with, a lot of common issues, from the Ukraine war to tensions with China. Will they use Russian assets to provide aid to Ukraine? Can India help the G7 counter Beijing? All this and more coming up on the show tonight. But first, the headlines.
Mahatma Gandhi's statue in Milan vandalized by Khalistani extremists. The incident took place hours after its inauguration. India has raised the issue with Italian officials. It comes just days ahead of the G7 summit in Italy, which Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also attending. Hezbollah rains rockets on Israel. It's in response to an Israeli airstrike which killed one of its commanders in South Lebanon on Tuesday. Iran-backed Hezbollah has traded cross-border fire with the Israeli army almost daily since the Gaza war began in October. At least 41 people killed and dozens injured in a fire at a residential building in Kuwait, many Indians among the casualties. Prime Minister Narendra Modi condoles the deaths and assures assistance to the injured. The building's owner has been detained. The area where the fire started is heavily populated with foreign workers. In India, Chandrababu Naidu sworn in as the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh. This is the fourth time that the TDP chief will be serving as the Chief Minister of the state. Ally and Janasena chief Pawan Kalyan to be Naidu's deputy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and several union ministers attended the oath-taking ceremony. And South Korean ramen is too hot to handle for Denmark. Copenhagen recalls several spicy ramen noodle products made by a South Korean company. Claims the levels of chili pepper extract in these products could poison consumers. But the Korean ramen maker says their food is safe for consumption.
The G7 summit kicks off tomorrow. We told you about the agenda yesterday. There's a host of issues that these leaders have to address. But one thing stands out, and that is tackling Russia. The G7 is once again gearing up to take an aim at Russia, specifically Russian money. They want to use Russian assets to provide financial assistance to Ukraine. Reports say the deal is done, only some last-minute details are being finalized, and that the US is confident of making an announcement during the G7 summit.
We will announce new steps to unlock the value of the immobilized Russian sovereign assets to benefit Ukraine and to help them recover from the destruction that Mr. Putin's army has caused.
Now, this would be a significant move. It would have wide-ranging implications for the global financial system. It could undermine the world's trust in the system. It's like your neighbor going to a mall and buying products worth billions of dollars, but they are not the ones paying the bills. You are, because your bank decided to charge your credit card for their shopping, and that too without your consent. That's what the West is doing here with Russian assets. Moscow had assets worth $280 billion in Western financial institutions. When the war in Ukraine began in 2022, Western governments froze these Russian assets. They were parked in the West, mostly in three countries: Belgium, France and Germany. Now, this money is lying with the banks in the form of securities and cash. And these assets have been frozen, meaning Russia cannot access its own funds. But the money is still lying in the bank and it's generating interest, just like a fixed deposit in a bank would. The West wants to give this Russian money to Ukraine, and this would be done in the form of a loan. That's what the Americans have proposed. Here's their plan. The G7 will extend a $50 billion loan to Ukraine. The repayments could be financed through the earnings of the Russian assets. This is the interest generated by Russian government assets lying in the West. And this interest is significant. Every year, these assets could generate more than $2.5 to $3.5 billion in interest, $3.7 billion according to some estimates. This money could be diverted to repay the $50 billion loan. European leaders are calling this a solidarity package for Ukraine.
We will meet again about this at the G7 summit where, we both hope, all G7 members will agree again to commit to a solidarity package to Ukraine of $50 billion.
Now, this plan has three benefits for the West. First, it ensures an uninterrupted flow of funds for Ukraine. Second, Russia loses the profits. Its core investment stays intact, but Moscow will lose the earnings from interest. And third, Russian assets will become bargaining chips for future negotiation with Moscow for potential peace talks. Now, if this plan goes through, what will Russia do? Can Moscow stop the West from diverting its money and handing it over to Kiev? Back in the month of March, Russia had threatened to sue the West. The Kremlin had said that if profits from its assets are diverted, it will use, and I'm quoting, all possible judicial mechanisms to hit back at Europe.
We consider any attacks by the European Union or by anybody else against Russian assets as illegal and in violation of the fundamental principles of international law. We are talking about another attempt to legitimize theft at state level.
But the EU is ready to push back, so there could be a legal face-off. Although Vladimir Putin is going a step further now, last month the Russian president signed a decree which gave the Russian state some new powers. If they want, they can now simply seize any Western asset in Russia. This includes properties, real estate, securities, even Western stakes in Russian companies. They can take all of it. And the Russian state can now step in and simply take over. Moscow claims it has identified some assets already. These assets are worth $290 billion. Currently, they're owned by Western interests. So if the G7 goes ahead with this plan, Moscow is expected to respond in kind, and this battle is expected to escalate. But it's not just about Russia and the West. This face-off sends a troubling signal to the rest of the world too. Financial assets of sovereign nations are being weaponized here. This is already leading to unintended consequences. Central banks around the world are nervous. Today it's Russia, tomorrow it could be them. Their assets held by Western institutions could also be frozen in a similar fashion. So this is a clear vulnerability. They're increasing their gold reserves and they prefer to hold them at home now, within their borders. That's what banks are doing. In 2020, 50% of the world's central banks held part of their gold reserves at home. By 2023, this number shot up to 68%, and it's likely to go further up. By 2028, 74% of the central banks may move most of their gold reserves back home. Recently, India's RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, also shifted around 100 tons of its gold back from the UK to India. This was a rare move. Since 1991, the RBI did not think about executing such a transfer. And how much gold does the RBI have in its reserve? Reports say around 822 tons of gold. So part of it is outside India, the other half stays in India. So how did the RBI explain this move? The central bank said it had the space to store the gold within the country, so it decided to use that space. There was no mention of the geopolitical tensions between Russia and the West, but it goes without saying that these tensions are influencing the decisions of central banks around the world. Their faith in the international banking system is eroding. The G7 may succeed in transferring Russian money to Ukraine, but they would end up paying a huge price for it. Now let's talk about the G7 members, the leaders of the participating nations. 6 out of the 7 face domestic hurdles. Tough elections on the horizon, dwindling support, and the possibility of an ouster. 6 of the G7 leaders face this. The only exception is the host, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Her stock is on the rise, while the other leaders are facing a rout. First, let's look at the struggling politicians. 3 of them are in immediate danger: US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and French President Emmanuel Macron. Biden faces an election in the month of November this year, and he's barely hanging on. Recent polls showed that he's neck and neck with his rival Donald Trump, even though Trump is now a convicted felon. That shows that the US public does not rate Biden very highly. and he may just get the sack in a few months from now. Things look even worse for Rishi Sunak. The British Prime Minister is trailing by a massive margin. His party is staring at a rout in the election next month. Their fate should be sealed in about 3 weeks from now. So it's likely that this G7 summit will be Rishi Sunak's last. Then there's Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who's taken a risky gamble. He called for snap parliamentary elections after his party got a drubbing in the recent European Union parliamentary elections. The EU results showed that Macron's party has lost public confidence, and he wants to turn that around immediately. If his ploy works, if his party manages to win the election, his position will be secure. However, if they lose, Macron will become a lame duck president. The opposition will take over the French parliament. They will block every move of the president. So Macron will be almost powerless till he leaves office in 2027. So this is how Biden, Sunak and Macron are placed. Then we come to the other three leaders who are struggling. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Scholz is in the same boat as Macron. His party did very badly in the recent EU elections. They came third in Germany. So like Macron, Scholz seems to have lost popular support. But unlike Macron, Scholz is not trying to salvage his legitimacy. So far, he has resisted calls for a snap election. It seems that he wants to ride out the storm instead of facing it head on. But this strategy may not help his popularity, and whatever he does, Germany will still go to polls next year at the latest. So if not now, Olaf Scholz may be out of the door in a year's time. Then there's Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. His country goes to polls next year as well, and he currently has a record low approval rating, the lowest in history for a leader of his party. Opinion polls suggest that Trudeau won't survive the next election. Then there's Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. His cabinet has hit its lowest approval since he took charge. They've been rocked by one scandal after another. His party has been linked to a controversial church. The alleged ties led to the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. 4 of Kishida's cabinet ministers had to quit last December over a fundraising scandal. This prompted a new funding law last week in a bid to control damage. But Kishida's popularity continues to sink, and he may not be able to survive the next general election that is slated for 2025 in Japan. So to recap, Biden, Sunak and Macron could lose power this year. Scholz, Trudeau and Kishida could be out next year, which means 6 out of the G7 government, 7 leaders, are in a weak position, 6 out of 7. The only exception, like I said, is the host, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. She emerged as a big winner of the recent EU election. Her party more than doubled their seat tally. It makes her a force to be reckoned with in Europe and in the G7, and Meloni knows this.
It is a message that comes to us from Italians. Go ahead, go ahead. I take it as someone's message to say go ahead and do it, if possible with greater determination. A sign that I understand, a sign that I am ready to seize. And I'm proud that we are heading to the G7 and to Europe with the strongest government of all.
She said, the strongest government of all. Giorgia Meloni knows that she's firmly in the driver's seat. She's the only G7 leader who seems to have public support. In fact, support for her has increased since she came to power. So as the others struggle with their legitimacy, Meloni could be the one taking the lead. One of the key discussions this week will involve the EU's top job, the post of European Commission President. The current President, Ursula von der Leyen, will be at the G7 summit. She will sit down with Scholz, Macron and Meloni to try and formalize an EU parliamentary coalition. Now, von der Leyen needs support from at least 2 of these 3 leaders, and Meloni is in the strongest position to negotiate a deal here. If she extends her support to Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission would have to accommodate Meloni. And this would cement her place as a global leader. And given how her peers are struggling, no one seems to be better suited to take on a bigger role at the global stage. So Meloni has the mandate, both at home and in the EU Parliament. And there's been so much buzz over this European Union election in the past few days. I'm sure some of you have wondered, what exactly is the European Parliament? What does it do? Why does it hold elections? And why do the European parliamentary elections matter? And since we're focusing on Europe, Let's address these issues one by one. First of all, what is the European Parliament? Now, Europe is made up of about 50 countries, the continent of Europe. 27 of these countries form a bloc called the European Union. Now, each of these countries has their own government, their own election, and their own way of functioning. But as part of the EU, they also have some things in common. They share some things in common, like a common market, a common currency, and the same rights. And to regulate and run all of this, the European Union has some common institutions. These are bodies that take decisions for the entire bloc. And which are these bodies? The European Commission, the European Council, and the European Parliament. They all work together, all three of them, to take decisions for the bloc. The European Parliament focuses on 3 Ds: debate, decision-making, and democratic rights. It works with the European Council and the European Commission to pass, amend, and reject legislation. And who sits in this European Parliament? There's a total of 720 members. They are elected as members of national parties. They contest as members of national parties in their respective countries. But once they join the European Parliament, they're organized by political affiliation. Like there are leftists, centrists, and the right wing. Right now, there are 7 such groups, plus some independent members in the European Parliament, which brings us to the second question. Who elects them? The people of EU countries. 450 million citizens cast votes to elect these members of the European Parliament. In fact, it is the only EU institution where members are elected. So essentially, it's like the voice of the people. This election is held every 5 years through a secret ballot. It is organized by the 27 member states. The number of seats for each country depends on its population. For example, Germany is the most populous EU state. It has more than 84 million people. So Germany gets the most number of seats in the European Parliament, and that is 96. Malta is the smallest country by population, so it gets 6 seats. Once elected, these MEPs or members of European Parliament look at all kinds of issues from migration to climate change. Another big responsibility is the EU budget. The Parliament approves it. It also controls how the money is spent. But the EU Parliament is not all powerful because it cannot propose its own law. That power lies with the European Commission, not with the Parliament. The Parliament can ask the Commission, it can pass or reject a law, it can also amend a law, but it cannot draft a law. Which brings us to this year's election. The so-called far right or the Eurosceptics have made huge gains in this election in the European Parliament. Voters were worried about migration, security, and the future of the bloc, and they seem to have voted for these parties. They've picked these parties, the Eurosceptics. Does that mean that these parties can now change the way the European Union functions? Well, not really. The European Parliament is important, but like I told you, it cannot function without the Commission or the Council. And those two bodies, the Commission and the Council, still remain in the hands of the centrists. So not very much will change immediately. For that to happen, the Eurosceptic parties must unite as a larger group. And that's often a challenge, because each party has different priorities, different ambitions, and a different voter base to cater to. Take Marine Le Pen's national rally in France. She once said that Germany's AfD was too toxic to be an ally. So the Eurosceptics also have divisions amongst themselves. And these elections may show growing support for the far right in Europe. The result can help these parties in their respective countries, but it may not significantly alter the trajectory of Europe in the short term. Last year, Italy faced an unusual crisis, one that had the entire nation in turmoil. Pasta prices had shot through the roof. The Italian government called a special meeting. Since then, the situation has improved. But what led to the hike in the first place, and how did Italy tame it? We met the nonnas or grandmothers of Bari to find out. These women make pasta on the streets every day. It's an art that they seem to have perfected. But how did the rise of pasta prices affect their business? And have things become better for them now? Also, is Italy's love for pasta the secret ingredient to its economic resilience? Take a look. Long and winding, short and curvy, thick and hollow. It doesn't matter for the Italians. If it's pasta, it must be eaten. Very few food items have this sort of power over a country. But as they say, power comes at a cost. Around this time last year, the Italian government had an emergency meeting. A central minister called some officials and industry experts, not to discuss a national security threat or a health emergency. It was a pasta crisis. Pasta prices in Italy were up by 20%, while overall inflation had risen only by 8%. So obviously, the Italians wanted answers, and that is why the government called an emergency meeting. It's been 1 year since that meeting, but has the situation improved since? We'll find out today. Bari is the perfect place to test this out. One of the key landmarks here is the Norman Castle. Around 100 meters away, you see this narrow passageway. These women run the show here, the nonnas or grandmothers of Bari. Their work is equal parts inspiring and mechanical. Stretch, cut, roll and repeat. It's a routine they have perfected over many years. And the end product looks like this. It's called orecchiette pasta, which means little ears. If you look at the shape, it's clear why. They come in different colors but the same shape. But what do the nonnas have to say about pasta prices? Has it affected their sales too?
Not only pasta and wheat, the prices of other food items like fruits, vegetables, and milk had also gone up.
Not surprising. Pasta is an emotion in Italy. Every year, this country makes 4 million tons of pasta. 60% of Italians eat it every day. The average Italian eats 23 kilograms of pasta every year, and these are mind-boggling numbers. But it's not just pasta in Italy. The situation is similar across Europe. In 2022, food inflation touched 8.5% in Europe. Food and fuel became more expensive. Do you know what else happened in 2022? Russia invaded Ukraine. And Europe's response to this invasion was to isolate and punish Russia. But in the process, they ended up punishing their own people. Take the pasta example. Pasta is made of wheat. Do you know who produces and exports this wheat? Russia and Ukraine. So the sanctions ended up making pasta more expensive for Europeans. Italy did make amends though. First, they created a monitoring agency to regulate the price, to make sure sellers are not hoarding. Then they expanded supply chains. Russia and Ukraine were the source of Italy's problem, but they turned it into a solution. After the war, Italy bought more agro products from Ukraine and Russia, around 150% more from Ukraine and 9% more from Russia. Slowly, these moves are working. Italy's inflation slowed down to 1.3% in March 2024. Compare that to the EU average, which is more than 2.5%. So Italy's strategy worked. In 2022, their inflation was at a 4-decade high. But since then, it has fallen 10 percentage points. And it comes at the perfect time. Germany and France have been the two top economies of the EU. They were considered Europe's growth engines. But now Italy has a chance to break this duopoly. Inflation is already under control here. Its GDP is growing faster than Germany and France. And chances are that going forward, Germany and France will be caught up in domestic squabbles. So this is Italy's opportunity to steal their thunder. It's all about consistency. Maybe their love for pasta is not their weakness after all. Maybe it will strengthen their resolve to fight inflation. Vantage continues after a short break.
Speaking like someone who's new to this, you're speaking with the experience, the maturity of someone who's decades older. It's so lovely. It's in fact so rare to hear someone speak with this kind of wisdom, especially at 25, but even frankly from those who are older. So it was so lovely to speak to you. Thank you for joining us here on The Breakfast Club.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I really hope that whatever expectations the people of this country have from me, I can deliver to that. Thank you. First of all, thank you to the entire team for having me. Thank you, Sonal, for inviting me. And I'm really, like you told me earlier, you've never invited a politician over for this show. So I take this humble opportunity in thanking the entire team for considering me. How I am celebrating this victory, honestly, everybody is asking me, how are you feeling? What is the feeling like now that you're finally a parliamentarian? And I only have one reply, that I still haven't found the time to consume the entire process properly. There's so much been going on, and I'm constantly meeting new people, connecting to new people. Although this part I'm thoroughly enjoying, but I still haven't found the time to have any kind of celebrations as of yet.
All right, but Shambhavi, tell us this: how does a 25-year-old girl like you, who went to LSR, went abroad and did her studies, come back to being a politician? How did that come along?
So Italy's economic situation has been improving, but has it improved enough to bear the cost of the G7? Because global summits are not cheap, and the G7 is no exception. Canada was the G7 host in 2018, and the summit cost taxpayers 605 million Canadian dollars. That's about 440 million US dollars at today's exchange rate. In 2019, France was the host. They toned down the spending, but the bill still came to over 36 million euros, which is more than $39 million today. And this was when France decided to use existing infrastructure. The UK played host in 2021, and the bill for that summit crossed $115 million. So clearly the G7 is a drain on the host nation's coffers. And Italy looks like it is going all out. Let's show you the venue, the Borgo Ignazia Resort. It's a luxury resort located in southern Italy's Fasano town. The resort will host the G7 members, the delegates from other invited countries, and their entourage. So it definitely won't be cheap. And the costs don't end here. There are also gifts.
Male prime ministers will be gifted silver cufflinks made according to my design in a package branded Tallarico for the G7. For female prime ministers and the spouses of the male prime ministers, there will be handbags, a shopper, a bag that I created about a year and a half ago, and it is having success, and I am very pleased that this new product was chosen as a gift by Meloni for the summit in Puglia.
That was Maurizio Tallarico, the owner of an Italian tailoring store. His products are bespoke and world famous. His ties have been worn by almost every Italian prime minister or president. Even US presidents like Barack Obama and Donald Trump wear his ties. So this gift hamper will be worth quite a bit. Next, there are the security costs. When you have world leaders, you also have world-class security, and Italy is taking this up a notch. The Italian Interior Ministry has chartered a cruise ship for the police. It's called the Goddess of the Night. 2,600 officers will be accommodated on board this vessel. Safes on the ship will be used to store weapons. There will be specialized rooms for police equipment. And the cruise ship will be docked at Brindisi, a city near the G7 venue. And how much will this cost? The charter cost has not been made public, but cruise ships can cost upwards of $1.5 million a day. Then there will be cost for police deployment as well. When the G7 was held in the UK in 2021, more than half the cost was for security, so the Italian cruise corps will squeeze the taxpayers. Now, considering all these tall expenses, the G7 summit will have to deliver results. And that depends on who's coming. You obviously have the G7 members, they're all coming, but the other guests are equally important. Meloni has gone all out. The guest list includes Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Jordan's King Abdullah II, multiple African heads of state, and even the Pope. The Pope will be delivering a lecture on artificial intelligence, which may sound odd, but apparently the Pope has been working with AI for years. The Vatican and firms like Microsoft began collaborating in 2020 on some principles known as the Rome Call for AI Ethics. So that is why the Pope will deliver a lecture on artificial intelligence. Then there are the other guests. Giorgia Meloni has opened the doors for almost everyone, it seems. She wants the world present for her moment of glory when she takes her place as one of the G7's most powerful leaders. The guest list shows various priorities: the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, illegal immigration to Europe, and ties with Arab nations. Meloni wants to be part of all these conversations, and that is why she's invited so many delegates. It's her signal to the world that Italy has finally returned to the global stage. Puglia is famous for a lot of things. Its olive groves, its picturesque streets, the beautiful coastline. But there's also something else that this region is known for, and that is the mafia. I know what you must be thinking: Italy and mafia. How cliched, but it's also true. This region is home to Italy's fourth organized crime group. They infiltrate almost everything from local businesses to the government. So what explains this mafia culture, and more importantly, will it affect the G7 summit? We decided to find out. Great weather, not a lot of buzz, and awesome food. This is probably why Giorgia Meloni chose Puglia to host the G7. It oozes weekend getaway vibes. The locals are never rushed, the cafes are never packed, and the roads never busy. But beneath this calm, Puglia and Bari are hiding a secret.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
That's right. Bari has a mafia problem. Look at these headlines in the local media: maimings, kneecappings, and death threats. All classic signs of a mafia turf war. Italy has three main organized crime groups: Cosa Nostra in Sicily, Camorra in Naples, and 'Ndrangheta in Calabria. The one in Puglia is emerging as the fourth one, the Sacra Corona Mafia. So how bad is the situation? In Italy, the mafia often infiltrate public projects. Say there's a residential complex or a bridge being built, the mafia will attach themselves to it. They will infiltrate local governments, and this is more common than you would imagine. Earlier this year, a mayor near Bari was arrested for trying to buy votes from the mafia. Elsewhere, 15 town councils have been dissolved over mafia infiltration. So the equation around here seems to be quite clear. If you want to remain in power, you have to make deals with the mafia. The Puglia Mafia has 30 clans. Put together, they have around 5,000 members, nearly all of them men. Their main business is drug trafficking. See this long and pretty coastline? You may think it's great for tourism and trade, but the mafia sees it differently. For them, the coast is great to smuggle drugs. This illegal trade generates billions of dollars in revenue. And what do they do with it? Most of it is laundered back through proper businesses, like hotels and restaurants.
Business principale è il traffico degli stupefacenti.
Drug trafficking is the main business. Narcotics are truly the main objective. Then, that is always accompanied by extortion, usury, and now, like all over the national territory, we have infiltration into the public administration and procurement.
Nella pubblica amministrazione, negli appalti.
This whole mafia business raises three questions. 1. What explains the mafia culture in Italy? 2. Is anyone fighting against it? And 3. Will it endanger the G7? To answer these questions, we visited the University of Bari. Professor Marilu Mastrogiovanni teaches journalism there. She is a crusader against the mafia.
The mafia always pursues its profit motive at any cost. Every opportunity for profit is seized. Modern mafias mold themselves on economic and social changes. They adapt to socio-economic and even political changes. So during the pandemic, the mafia found the ideal terrain to proliferate a situation of instability, of emergency, a liquidity crisis on the part of companies, on the part of families.
I know what you're thinking. Italy and mafia, how dramatic and Hollywoodesque. Well, yes. Consider what happened in February this year. A judge in southern Italy got a rude surprise at her front door. A beheaded goat and a butcher's knife covered in blood. Next to it was a chilling message. It said, "Like this." And what was the judge's fault? Issuing arrest warrants for 22 mafia members. So yes, it is very dramatic. Professor Mastra Giovanni was also targeted by the mafia. The threats forced her to move her family away.
For more than 20 years, the mafia has been interested in me. It did so in various ways, first with soft signals, i.e. telephone threats. Then there were a series of episodes of damage to the editorial office of the Heel of Italy, up to the theft of all the computers in the editorial office, all the way to the threats towards me as a person, towards my family, like the episode of my dog being clubbed to death.
The question is, will it also jeopardize the G7? Looks unlikely right now. More than 5,000 soldiers have been deployed in the Puglia region. A US aircraft carrier is on its way to Puglia as we speak. So the summit venue itself is like a fortress under lockdown. We've been moving around Bari all day and this place is crawling with police officers. So the G7 summit may not be at risk. But what about life beyond the summit? By the end of this week, world leaders would have come and left. But the people here, the locals, will continue to live in fear. For them, the mafia is not some Hollywood villain on the silver screen. It is very much a part of their life. Can India help the G7 counter an aggressive and expansionist China? The Indian Prime Minister's presence at the summit may open up some new opportunities. Italy, the host, wants deeper coordination with the Indo-Pacific. On its part, India too may be ready to deal with the China threat head-on. Reports say New Delhi is working on a tit-for-tat move. In the month of April, China had renamed 30 locations in India's Arunachal Pradesh. And we told you about it, how Beijing gives Chinese names to Indian towns. Now, India is planning a similar move in response. A list has been compiled. India plans to assign new names to more than 24 territories in China's Tibet. And this list could be released soon. Who has prepared the list? The Indian military establishment. What's the source of these names? Apparently, Indian officials have looked through historical records. They plan on using ancient names in Indian languages for territories inside Tibet. Plus, India is challenging the Chinese renaming on another front as well. Take a look at this social media post. It is from the Indian Army's Eastern Command. It was posted last month. It has names of 7 areas in Arunachal Pradesh. Beijing had issued Chinese names for these areas in the Indian state, and this post is the Indian Army's counter to China. It highlights the Indian names of those 7 territories. So India seems to be changing its strategy because earlier when China released such a list, New Delhi's response was limited to statements of rejection and condemnation. But now India seems ready to offer a clear counter-narrative. And the shift is perhaps necessary. In the last 7 years, China has issued as many as 4 such lists, renaming more than 60 territories in Arunachal Pradesh. Beijing has been pressing its bogus claims more aggressively. They have no basis in history, no international support or recognition, but China keeps doing it. Arunachal Pradesh is an Indian state, but Beijing calls it South Tibet. And with every such list, China has sought to rename more and more territories in India. Recently, it also protested a visit by the Indian Prime Minister to the state of Arunachal Pradesh.
The southern Tibet region is Chinese territory, and the Chinese government has never recognized and firmly opposes the so-called Arunachal Pradesh illegally established by India. The China-India border issue remains unresolved, and India has no right to unilaterally develop the Chinese southern Tibet region.
So a pushback was long overdue. Renaming territories inside Tibet can be one part of it, but the government will have to come up with a more comprehensive strategy to deal with China. Yesterday, S. Jaishankar was asked about the border dispute. He's back as India's External Affairs Minister. He said that the government will focus on finding more solutions.
चीन के बारे में हम तो हमारी फोकस तो होगी कि सीमा में जो स्थिति जो है उसमें अभी भी कुछ इश्यूज बाकी बचे हुए हैं तो उसको कैसे निपटाया जाए.
So India may be considering new and diverse diplomatic options, and it needs to keep at it because the China problem is not going away in a hurry. One area of significant concern is India's economic dependence on Chinese goods, and this remains a major challenge for New Delhi. Take a look at this new report. India could greenlight joint ventures between Indian and Chinese companies. This is what the report says. But this would happen with some preconditions. Like the position of the Indian partner, they must hold a majority stake in the joint venture. This is the proposal at this point. But such joint ventures could create economic vulnerabilities for New Delhi, because Beijing has a reputation of using trade as a leverage to extract concessions. So how can India avoid this? One possible option would be to work with like-minded allies, and on this front, the G7 may prove to be a valuable forum. China is very much on the agenda of this summit, specifically the overproduction from Chinese companies and factories. The G7 wants to rebalance the global supply chains. It wants to stop the oversupply of goods from Chinese factories. They're considering raising tariffs on Chinese goods. Some members have already made moves in this direction, and this creates both a challenge and an opportunity for countries like India. Because observers say that Western tariffs also pose a risk. They may push China to start dumping goods in India. So India should raise this issue and demand safeguards at platforms like these. It also has a chance to improve trade relationships and push for a rebalancing of trade equations with the West. You see, the Chinese economy is weakening, so there cannot be a better time for New Delhi to make the most of this global shift. Vantage continues after a short break.
So basically, I'm a third generation politician from my family. I've always, I grew up in that environment since childhood. I've seen my father and grandfather serve people, and it has had a very positive impact on my mind. Young people in politics, I think when I see politics, I see myself as a catalyst of change. Now that I'm a representative of the people, by the people and for the people, it also gives me an edge to put my visions across, to put my thought across. I think that now as a parliamentarian, it's my duty to bring new ideas, new values to the entire political system. And what's been going on is something that I really experienced during my campaign is that people have lost touch with their voters. They are not connected to them emotionally. There's no heart-to-heart connect with their voters. Now it's just about vote bank and vote share.
Sharma, you kind of touched on this. Tell us, when you've spoken to people, what do you believe in the area that you're now going to be the Lok Sabha MP of? What are the issues that matter?
Core issues, definitely I come from, I have been elected from the Samastipur Lok Sabha. The constituency, Samastipur, is a little backward till now. There have been, it has been lacking few things that are basic, such as it does not have proper connectivity as of yet.
This Sunday, terrorists attacked a bus carrying pilgrims in Jammu and Kashmir's Riyasi district. The incident shocked India. Yesterday, a second attack happened in the Kathua district. Two terrorists opened fire at a village. Both were neutralized, but a civilian was injured and a police officer was killed. Soon after, there was another attack, this time in the Doda district. Terrorists attacked a joint checkpoint of police and security forces. 6 people, including 5 soldiers, were injured. That is 3 attacks in 3 days. So Jammu and Kashmir is on alert. But the escalation is not limited to this region. India has been fighting terrorism on multiple fronts for years. Even ahead of the G7 summit here, a Mahatma Gandhi statue has been vandalized by suspected Khalistanis in Italy. It's an issue that world leaders must focus on, but don't hold your breath for them to do it. Because some of these leaders are themselves guilty of appeasing the Khalistanis and turning a blind eye to Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. Here's a report.
Last evening was like any other in Jammu and Kashmir's Kathua district. But around 7:30 p.m., things changed. 2 people entered a village in the district. They went from house to house asking for water. Villagers became suspicious. They raised an alarm. And that's when the 2 terrorists opened fire, injuring a civilian. Security forces killed one of the terrorists on the spot, but the other fled. While the police and paramilitary forces launched a search operation, there was another attack. This time in the Doda district. Terrorists attacked a joint checkpoint of the police and security forces. Again, they opened fire. They also hurled a grenade at the checkpoint. Security forces retaliated. The exchange of fire continued till early Wednesday morning. 6 people, including 5 soldiers, were injured, but the terrorists fled. Around the same time, police were able to neutralize the second terrorist who was on the run after the Kathua incident. And a police officer was killed during the operation. 2 back-to-back terror attacks in Kashmir within a matter of hours. On Sunday, there was another one. Even as Prime Minister Narendra Modi was taking oath for a historic 3rd term, terrorists attacked a bus carrying pilgrims in Jammu and Kashmir's Riyasi district. They opened fire at the bus. The bus lost control and fell into a gorge. 9 people were killed. 33 people were injured.
बस हमारी जो है थोड़ी सी आगे जाकर खाई में पलट गई। 5-6 राउंड गिरने के बाद एक बड़ा पत्थर में जो है बस फंस गया और रुक गया। और सभी लोग जो है छोटी लोग हैं, उसमें कोई पड़ा था बेसुध, कोई इधर, कोई बाहर, कोई बस में, और सभी लोगों को एकदम जो है चोट लगा हुआ था। और फायर होता रहा, तब भी जो है 10-15 मिनट तक और फायर हुआ।
So that is 3 attacks in 3 days. The big question is, who is behind these attacks? The Pakistan-backed TRF, or the Resistance Front, claimed responsibility for the Riyasi attack. The TRF has been linked to the Lashkar-e-Toiba. It has also been responsible for terror attacks in Rajouri and Poonch over the last month. Meanwhile, Kashmir Tigers has reportedly claimed responsibility for the Kathua attack. It's an offshoot of the Pakistan-backed terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed. Since its inception in 2000, the group has carried out several attacks in Jammu and Kashmir, including the Uri attack of 2016 and the Pulwama attack of 2019. So far, many details remain unclear, but one link is clear. India's neighbor, the hotbed of terrorism, Pakistan, continues to ravage Kashmir. Ironically, these attacks come at a time when former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif congratulated Prime Minister Narendra Modi on his historic win. Sharif says that advancing the well-being and security of both nations will remain Pakistan's priority. So, is fueling terrorism in Kashmir Pakistan's idea of advancing security?
ये हमारा एक हॉस्टाइल नेबर है जिसके यहाँ पर जो पीसफुल हमारा सारा एनवायरनमेंट है उसको डैमेज करने के लिए उसकी हमेशा कोशिश ये रहती है। तो लिहाजा ये जो इन्फिल्ट्रेशन है ये अपीयर टू बी फ्रेश इन्फिल्ट्रेशन।
Jammu and Kashmir is on alert, but this escalation is not limited to it. Ahead of the G7 summit in Italy, a Mahatma Gandhi statue has been vandalized. But this time, the alleged culprits are Khalistani extremists. India's security is being threatened on multiple fronts. While the West loves to preach to India unnecessarily, it would be better if they instead use their voice against these cowardly attacks on India and its national icons.
With nearly 70 countries going to the polls, 2024 is the largest global election year yet. Many are calling it the AI election year. Elections across the world are loaded with deep fakes, robocalls, and now, believe it or not, even AI candidates. The UK goes to polls next month, and AI Steve plans to become Britain's first AI MP. Now, AI Steve is an AI persona of a real-life businessman named Stephen Endicott. It uses a rendition of Endicott's voice and an avatar. AI Steve can have up to 10,000 conversations at once. So voters can ask AI Steve questions or raise concerns, and people will have a 24/7 access to this artificial intelligence candidate. But if elected, who will show up in the parliament? Will it be the AI persona or its creator? Should people vote for an AI candidate? Also, is this a sign of the times to come? Here's a report.
Stephen Endicott is a UK-based businessman. For years now, he's been frustrated with the government. So Endicott decided to quote-unquote stop talking to the outside, get inside the tent and start changing policy. In 2022, he stood in a local election in a bid to enter politics. Although this venture ended in a loss, Endicott hasn't given up. As the UK goes to polls next month, he claims this time it will be different. Because this time, Endicott will not put himself forward as a candidate. This 4th of July, AI Steve will stand in the general election. AI Steve is an AI candidate. It's an AI persona of real-life Stephen Endicott, meaning it uses a rendition of Endicott's voice and an avatar, which has grey hair, broad shoulders and vacant eyes. It pretty much looks like your average white male politician. Maybe that explains the overconfidence. Because AI Steve aims to be the UK's first AI MP, it's running for the parliament as an independent. As dystopian as that sounds, if AI Steve is elected, how will it work? AI Steve can have up to 10,000 conversations at once.
Hi, I'm AI Steve, standing to be MP for Brighton and Hove.
It can transcribe and analyze, so voters can ask AI Steve questions related to policy making. They can raise issues. People will have 24/7 access to this possible policymaker. AI Steve will incorporate suggestions and requests into its platform. Based on the data, it will make policy decisions. But here's the catch. If it wins, you won't find AI Steve visiting the parliament. It's merely a conduit. Ultimately, it's Endicott who gets the seat. And AI Steve will be represented by its creator Endicott, who will attend parliamentary sessions and meetings. But there are a few problems here. First, Endicott claims that he will vote always in line with the constituent preferences, meaning the opinions expressed by AI Steve. But that sounds like a hefty promise, almost too good to be true. Second, how trustworthy is AI Steve? What do we really know about him? AI is known to hallucinate or glitch. Plus, at least for now, it lies in the hands of the creator. Who's to say that the technology can't be used for the wrong reasons? The worst-case scenarios are one too many, and they're not limited to AI Steve. This is the year of AI elections. With nearly 70 countries going to elections in 2024, AI is being used across the board.
Putin's illegal occupation of Kyiv and the impending...
From AI-powered callers to deepfakes.
Yes, indeed, I and my surroundings...
AI is transforming this global election year, all while policymakers are playing catch-up with technology. Without better guardrails, it will not be long before AI comes for their jobs, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. As some say, politics is too serious a matter to be left to the politicians.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In the UK, a man throws objects at Nigel Farage, the leader of Britain's right-wing Reform Party. In Argentina, a daredevil attempts to climb a 30-story building without safety gear. He managed to scale 25 floors and was later arrested. In El Salvador, more than 2,000 inmates are transferred to a mega prison. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day in 2005. Kuwait appointed its first woman cabinet minister. A veteran women's rights activist was named planning minister. This came only a month after legislators granted women the right to vote in the West Asian country. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwa. Ladies and gentlemen, fresh breaking news coming in on the top of the bulletin. This is concerning the terror scourge in Jammu and Kashmir, where fresh exchange of fire has been reported between terrorists and security forces in the Doda district. Now, firing took place in the Bhalesa area of Doda. One policeman has been injured in this exchange of fire. Remember, this is the fourth attack in 4 days in the Jammu region, ladies and gentlemen, where it seems the operations of the terror infrastructure has shifted from the Kashmir Valley to the Jammu region.